Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Canadian Club of Ottawa event, Unlocking Alberta's Potential, Fresh Solutions for Familiar Challenges. I'm Heather Bakken, President of the Canadian Club of Ottawa, and while we're meeting on a virtual platform today, I would like to acknowledge the rights of the Indigenous peoples to the land that each one of us is on as we participate today. For the Canadian Club of Ottawa, it's the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin. Anishinaabe are the original inhabitants of the land, and that's the same place where the Parliament buildings overlook the Ottawa River, which is just downstream from one of the most sacred places for Indigenous peoples. So, miigwech. It's my pleasure today to introduce our speaker, Doug Schweitzer. He's a Minister of Jobs, Economy, and Innovation in the great province of Alberta. He's joining us to address the economic hardships caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, and more importantly, the plans for an economic recovery. We will hear about Alberta's path forward to become a key player in the technology and innovation space, while implementing sector strategies to create economic growth following the pandemic. Before we start, we have a few housekeeping notes for all of you at home who are watching online. If your internet quality is poor, please click here to switch stream down on your screen, and you can view this at a lower bandwidth. It might reduce your video quality, but the audio quality will remain stable. You don't want to miss a word of what the minister has to say. If you're having other technical issues aside from this, there's a little request help button in the bottom right side of your screen. If you just want to have a quick look there, if you have any other issues, please send a request and a response and solution will be sent to the same email address you registered with for today's event. Also, at any point, please click on the questions tab and ask a question. We will be doing a Q&A, and the whole point of this is to engage you in the discussion today. So before we get to that discussion, I'd like to thank our corporate sponsors. We're very grateful to Shaw Communications and RBC Royal Bank for supporting this season. To our gold sponsors, Welch LLP, Strategy Corp, and TD Bank. I'd like to point out also that our theme this year at the Canadian Club, being in a virtual season, is community strength in a pandemic and post-pandemic world. These policy discussions will inform, engage, and hopefully educate everyone on a path forward. We're partnered this year with Impact Public Affairs, iPolitics, the Hill Times, and the Ottawa Business Journal. So we're just going to play a short video from our media sponsor, and then we'll get right to it.
Hi, I'm Michael Curran from the Ottawa Business Journal. Now celebrating its 25th anniversary, OBJ is a leading source of local news and business information. OBJ is also a proud supporter of the Canadian Club of Ottawa and its mission to provide our community's business leaders with context, perspective, and a deeper level of understanding. Please stay tuned for a draw to win a VIP subscription to OBJ.
Thanks very much, Michael. And now to introduce our guest. Minister Schweitzer was elected to the Legislative Assembly of Alberta in 2019. He's passionate about restoring Alberta's promise, which is, no matter where you came from, if you work hard, you can succeed. This has been the case in Alberta for decades and decades. He previously held the position of Alberta's Minister of Justice and Solicitor General and was appointed to Alberta's Minister of Jobs, Economy and Innovation on August 25th, 2020, which is 3 months ago tomorrow. Minister Schweitzer will oversee the implementation of Alberta's recovery plan, its sector strategies, and the province's growth agenda. Ladies and gentlemen, here is Alberta's Minister of Jobs, Economy and Innovation, Doug Schweitzer. Please take it away, Minister.
Thank you so much, Heather, and thank you to everybody for participating in this virtual conversation here today. I'm actually quite looking forward to it. When I was a young lawyer, I was actually on the board of the Canadian Club of Calgary, and I put together or helped organize many different speaking engagements in the city there, and I really enjoyed every single one of them. They were always so insightful. It was a friendly environment to just exchange ideas. So I'm really looking forward to this opportunity to tell you a little bit more about our recovery plan in Alberta and the path ahead for our province. And I really just want to start first, though, with how sobering it is to be in this position in government. When I was first elected, I mean, nobody foresaw this pandemic. And here we are, now we're, 9+ months into this pandemic. And, Alberta, we put in place, the lightest touch in the country early on. We were able to manage numbers in the last little while, particularly across this country, but particularly in the West. We've seen a rise in cases in COVID numbers, increased number of hospitalizations, ICU utilization. So just this week, we've been meeting as a cabinet to discuss further measures. We've already brought a few in earlier this month, but we're looking at further options. Our Premier, Jason Kenney, is going to be making an announcement later today regarding some of the further measures that we're going to be putting in place as a province. Obviously, I can't speak to those right now, but I want to make sure that you know that those are coming later today. But I'm going to focus most of my comments on where we're going in the long term. How are we going to position Alberta for long-term success coming out of this pandemic? And I want to kind of start with where we are. And right now in our province, we had over 300,000 layoffs in our province. And this was compounded not just by the pandemic, but also by a Saudi-Russian price war in the oil and gas industry. And that has led to some real true economic hardship in our province and high amounts of unemployment. That being said, we have over 260,000 Albertans are back to work. We're about 72% of the way back to from where we started in the pandemic. So some encouraging numbers that are at least starting to have that frame. And when we're looking at health measures going forward, we want to make sure that we try and preserve as many jobs as humanly possible to make sure that those people that have been struggling have work, that the small businesses that are teetering can try to survive throughout this pandemic and come out the other side. The way I look at it, we're effectively in the fourth quarter in dealing with this pandemic. Earlier on in the crisis, we didn't know exactly how long this was going to be. We didn't know exactly, what was the vaccine research going to look like? What were the treatment research going to look like? We saw, the horrifying images coming out of Italy and other countries. And we really, all of us in this country, did the responsible thing in that point in time to preserve lives and livelihoods. So, but right now we do have some promising vaccines on the horizon. We have a much better understanding of who is at risk right now. So we're trying to make sure, instead of using a big sledgehammer, that we're as precise as possible here in our province in dealing with the pandemic. And you'll see the Premier's announcement later today, along with our Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Dina Henshaw. So just wanted to kind of put that frame out there in some context. I'm not ignoring all those challenges right now, but I'm going to focus my remarks more on the longer term planning for where we're going as a province. And I just want to say as well, during this pandemic, we now have 7,400 businesses that have opened or reopened in Alberta. That's 400 more businesses than what we started with in our province at the beginning of the pandemic. So when people hear about the entrepreneurial spirit of Alberta, it is alive and well. People are betting on themselves. They're betting on the future of this province. They're betting on their ability to create opportunities for themselves and for small businesses. And that, to me, that's what attracted me to coming back to Alberta. I'm a third or fourth generation Alberta on both sides of the family, but I lived all over Western Canada. And when I started out my professional legal career, I landed on Calgary because it was truly a place where it didn't matter where you came from, didn't matter who your parents were. You came to Calgary, you worked hard, you could get ahead. And I love that about this province, is that it truly is one of those amazing places where you can make it on your own merits. And that is one of the fundamental things about Alberta that makes, I think, a little bit unique in this whole country, is that it truly is a place of opportunity. You come, you work hard, and you can truly achieve. So that really got me excited about this province. And also that's what drove me to run and get into this life as a politician. Before this, I was a partner at a big international law firm, but I saw too many people that were struggling, too many people that were losing some hope for the direction of their province. And that's why it was such an honor when the Premier asked me to take on this new role to implement our recovery plan as the Minister of Jobs, Economy and Innovation. It's a brand new ministry. It's taking over some other ministries and bolting on a whole bunch of new pieces to go along with it. But the recovery plan that we're putting in place, it has three foundations. Number one is creating the most competitive tax environment possible. So we accelerated our job creation tax cut, bringing our corporate tax rate down to 8%. We wanted to send a signal to the market that in Alberta, even though we're going to have financial challenges, all governments around the world right now have financial challenges in dealing with the pandemic. we wanted to send a signal that we are not going to be raising taxes to make sure we can pay for the cost of this. We want to make sure we send a signal that for the job creators, we're driving down the costs. We want to make sure we're the most competitive jurisdiction around. And right now, our corporate taxes in Alberta are the lowest in the country by far. Depending on what happens in the United States with President-elect Biden, it might become the most attractive jurisdiction in all of North America. So we're really trying to position ourselves for success, for innovation, growth, and for businesses to come to Alberta and make it their home. So that's one foundation. The other side of it is having the most efficient government possible. During boom times in Alberta, we allowed our cost of government to skyrocket. We were the outlier in the country for cost per capita in our province, and that we can no longer afford that luxury. So we're purposely working with our Minister of Finance to bring the cost of government down and make sure that we have the most efficient government possible. And with that, we have an Associate Minister of Red Tape Reduction who's lowering the regulatory burden in Alberta by 1/3. And we're already well on our way to accomplishing that goal. With the changes that we've made in the first year alone, we've saved businesses almost $500 million in costs associated with regulatory burden. So we're well on our way to making sure that Alberta is the most efficient government humanly possible, both on the regulatory side, but as well as on a cost competitive side. We just simply have to get that done for the long term. And another the third leg of our strategy for the recovery plan that you'll see throughout the plan is around labor and talent. We have to make sure that we position Alberta to continue to be a driver of talent, to make sure we can attract the right talent and make sure that people have the right skill sets for the jobs of the future. So that's another big part of our overall strategy. And I'm going to dive in now to some of the details that I actually get quite excited about. And the first one I want to dive into is around technology. And I was talking to some people earlier on today about what we're starting to see. And you take a look at the city of Calgary in particular. This is my hometown, so I'm a little bit more bullish on Calgary than anywhere else, but I'll be a little bit biased on that. But when it comes to Calgary, it's now ranked number 52 in the world from the top 100 emerging technology cities. I'll just note that that's 10 places higher than Ottawa. So right now we're ranking higher than Ottawa. We're an emerging play. And that ranking was actually before Calgary broke its record again for venture capital. We broke our record in 2019, and then we broke it again already in 2020. We've got about 4 or 5 companies that are on the verge of becoming unicorns. We've got people that are in the video streaming bit world. We've got a whole bunch of companies like Benevity, Alberta'S that are really on that verge of becoming the unicorns that'll lay the foundation for the future as well in our province. So it's just really, it's actually quite an exciting time in that space in Calgary. And just last week, we had a new accelerator venture capital fund get stood up around clean technologies, green technologies, geothermal, hydrogen, carbon capture. And it's also building in technology into it as well, like the immense capital that goes into that from a data side. So it's really actually quite interesting. We've got this emerging play in the city of Calgary, and as well as across Alberta. And I'm going to get into Edmonton in a minute, but it's really starting to take hold, and people are really starting to see that there's an advantage to be in Alberta. We still have relatively low cost of living. Like the suburbs, you can still get a house in the suburbs for $500,000 and get to downtown in 20 minutes. Low taxes. The best pathways for a major city of over 1 million people in the country. You got mountains that are an hour away, and I think it's always ranks in the top 5 from a livability worldwide standpoint. So Calgary has a lot going for it, and so does the rest of Alberta. So when we launched our innovation strategy, we wanted to build on that strong foundation that we already have. So we brought in place $175 million for the Alberta Enterprise Corporation. So this is a fund-on-fund strategy with venture capital that's supposed to, when you have to get matching private sector money in, should create about $500 million of investment into venture capital into the province. I've already mentioned the job creation tax cut to make sure that we're most competitive on the long-term corporate tax side, as well as we brought in place the Innovation Employment Grant, which is predicated on a SHRED model to cover up to 20% of research and development. That takes effect January 1 coming up. So that's another way that we're trying to encourage and foster that innovation and technology space here in the province. And when you take a look as well at the city of Edmonton and the amount and the technology and developments going into Edmonton, the University of Alberta, with its AI, machine learning technologies, it's one of the top 3 ranked schools in the world in that space. That's why we have Google's DeepMind base in the city of Edmonton. So that's just one kind of piece of it, where the talent pool that historically was kind of graduating and potentially leaving Alberta is now graduating and wanting to stay in Alberta. The other thing too was with the companies now looking more and more at remote work, we're starting to see more and more of that talent wanting to stay home in the province of Alberta. We're developing it. We're creating more opportunities from a career perspective, but we're also retaining more of that talent because of the desire for flexibility in work. The other thing too that I'll note is that the University of Alberta is at the forefront when it comes to developing the COVID vaccine. It was one of the recipients for the grant money from the federal government to developing the vaccine. They have a trial going into phase 1 and 2. It's a far more robust method that they're using. It's a DNA versus an RNA method that they're utilizing there. But we also, and this is the other thing too that people don't always talk about, and we have to raise awareness around it, is that the University of Alberta also had a Nobel Prize winner, Dr. Michael Houghton, recently at the University of Alberta in virology. And he has about 7 different methods, vaccines that he's developing that are completely trailblazing, that he's just getting to the point where they're going to get to the testing and potential commercialization. So there's huge opportunities here in the province of Alberta when it comes to the innovation, growth, health, clean technology, green technology, the film and video, and a whole bunch of different places that we're trying to position Alberta for. So there's lots of things on the go here that are just exciting for us as a province. And the next piece that is building in the technology and innovation side is actually agriculture. So I had the amazing opportunity to go to Olds College. So Olds College is right in central Alberta, about halfway between Calgary and Edmonton. They have a research and development lab there that's at farmer's field, built in with a bunch of kind of factory warehouses that they have as well. And they literally have a drone that is, think like 15, 20 feet high, 15, 20 feet wide. It's not like your conventional tractor, all sensors on it that they can go put it out into the farmer's field and do testing with. And they're really at the forefront when it comes to developing out the agricultural technology play. And historically, with the dominance of the oil and gas industry and the cost of labor, a lot of these products would have been developed in other markets. It would have been developed in Saskatchewan, Manitoba, south of the border. But we're starting to see that cost competitiveness come back for Alberta, where we do have the ability to do manufacturing plays. We have the lower, as I mentioned, lower corporate taxes, a labor force that's good at welding and wiring and other things that were historically oil and gas plays that are now available as well for the agricultural side. So we're making sure as well that we position Alberta as the agricultural technology leader in the country. And just kind of highlight the untapped potential in there. Olds College is now teamed up with an accelerator out of Silicon Valley called Thrive. So one of the best accelerators in the world is now teamed up with rural Alberta school dealing with agricultural technology. So we are very bullish on the opportunities ahead in the agricultural space. We have a plan to grow that industry immensely over the next 10 years. And to that end, we also did a largest investment in a generation in irrigation expansion. So 200,000 acres of new irrigated land in Alberta. And for me, if you're not a farm kid or if you don't appreciate that is a massive amount of land that we're going to be developing out, which is going to create over $400 million of additional GDP every single year just by having those 200,000 acres irrigated. That deal was done in partnership with the Canada Infrastructure Bank, the province of Alberta, local irrigation districts for $800 million. And it's just exciting. And we're not done yet. We think that there's actually further irrigation projects that can be done in Alberta to enhance the value of the land, to make sure that we can enhance the value of the products being generated here in the province of Alberta. So I'm really bullish on the ability of us to develop out the technology side and all of those different areas, build on our strong foundation that we have as an economy, but also unlock further potential when it comes to agriculture as well and feeding the world. So that's really exciting. The next area that I'd like to highlight comes around labor and talent. And we're doing a big push right now when it comes to making sure that the turnaround time for people that want to reskill, retool is reduced as much as possible. I was speaking to a young high school class, and they were asking me, what kind of career should we go into? How does it look for us? Like, what should we be doing? And I just think that we're heading into an era of disruption. We're heading into an era of change, rapid change, with the onset of AI, artificial intelligence, machine learning, quantum computing, all the different pieces here that are going to be highly disruptive to the workplace. We have to make sure we set up a structure where people can get retooled quickly. I remember just taking a look from my legal background. When I first got started, it was the BlackBerry, click, 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 was the original BlackBerry generation. I didn't own a cell phone until I started law school. So really, they're talking about a generation that's going to go through so much change that we are looking at how do we build in institutions that can give them those new skill sets as fast as humanly possible. And with some of the different learning platforms that are out there that are AI and machine learning based, you can do this in a really rapid way to give people the skill sets that they need as fast as they need, and really give them that certification that, through that process, that they're ready for certain types of jobs. So we have the Southern Alberta Institute of Technology, SAIT, just launched a whole new digital training school that they have built in downtown Calgary, close to a lot of our accelerators and incubators that we have in the province, to make sure that we give those opportunities to Albertans. And we've got a lot of geologists, we've got a lot of folks that are trained in the oil and gas industry. Many of them are going to have a bright future to continuing in the energy space, but some of them are looking at other alternatives. And a geologist is truly a data scientist. They work with data all the time. It'd be the same for somebody that's trained in psychology. They're working with data sets all the time. So we want to make sure that we give them the ability to train and retrain as fast as humanly possible. So we're working on that right now. We also even have some startups one called AltaML that's actually working in this space as well. So how can they train the workforce of the future? How do they lower that onboarding time for companies? And we're working with them arm in arm to do this as fast as humanly possible in real time. And on the labor and talent piece as well, just on that theme, we've built out a new immigration streams for the province. Historically for Alberta, our labor crunch was, think Fort McMurray, you've got Tim Hortons, you've got labor jobs. That was kind of the pressure, was temporary foreign workers to come and help in that area. Right now, from a workforce, even though we have high unemployment, there are certain areas where there's a global demand for talent. And a lot of it is technology driven, and it's that global demand. It's not isolated just to Alberta, but we have to make sure we position Alberta to succeed. So we've created 2 new streams for immigration. One is around the entrepreneurial stream, and then the other one is on graduates. So they come to our post-secondary institutions. So we have 2 new streams now to help attract the right talent to our workforce in Alberta. We've also recently launched for our young people to get them into the workforce. We partnered with MyTax to create about 4,000 positions over the next 3 years to be able to get them into the workforce, help cover the cost of training our young people, to give them every single possible opportunity to get into the workforce. So that part is just really important for us strategically. How do we position Alberta? How do we get the talent? How do we get them in place into the workforce? And one thing also, just a little bit of a sneak peek, I don't want to steal the thunder of one of my colleagues, but we're also working on a significant job grant program, working with people, working with Alberta companies to hire out people, help reduce the cost of onboarding them into the workforce and training them as well. So that's something to stay tuned for many of you that may have clients that are looking at different ways of hiring talent and training talent in a disruptive age. This is one way that we're looking at expanding out those opportunities in the province of Alberta. So I've covered a lot of territory. We're about 20 minutes into our speech, and I haven't even scratched the surface yet on energy. And I did that structurally on purpose to make sure that people understand that in the province of Alberta, what we're doing with our recovery plan truly is about diversification. It's about making sure that we position our province for long-term success, building on the strong foundations that we have. And I could have gone through a whole bunch of different announcements that we've done already in those spaces, but I also wanted to highlight for you that we're not even halfway done making announcements yet, or about halfway on our recovery plan. We still have a whole bunch of announcements to do on pharmaceutical and life sciences, aviation and logistics, manufacturing. So a whole bunch of policy work is still being done right now through the cabinet process, through the policy process, that'll be launched next year. But now I want to kind of turn and pivot to one of the strongest parts of our economy in the province of Alberta, and that's the energy space. So I'll dive first into the pipeline side of things. I mean, when we first got elected, I don't think it'll be a surprise to anybody participating here, but every now and again, the province of Alberta and our federal government have friction every now and again. Might be the understatement of the year, but every now and again, we do have some friction. And when I was Minister of Justice, that was, I was put in that role. We were challenging the carbon tax, challenging BLC 69. We had issues with the tanker ban. So there was lots of points of friction between us and the federal government. And, one of the things now that with my new role, I'm here to try and find commonality. I'm here to try and find ways that we can work together to create opportunities for Albertans. Doesn't even some of my colleagues and the Premier every now and again, we haven't changed our policy positions on those other spaces. I'm just saying, so when you hear me speak in my new role, it may be a little bit different tone than what I had a couple months ago when I was the Minister of Justice. So A couple areas that have actually been encouraged, and when we first got elected, we weren't sure exactly how this was going to progress, but we've been encouraged by the progress on TMX. Construction, we're told, is on budget and on time. So we're encouraged by the progress that's being made on Trans Mountain Pipeline. That's encouraging for us in the province of Alberta. We also made the strategic decision to invest in the Keystone XL pipeline. We put $1.5 billion of preferred equity into that project to see it get underway right now. So construction is happening in Alberta, Saskatchewan. Pipe has already crossed the US-Canada border. Construction is underway in the United States. So that is ongoing right now. Obviously, with President-elect Biden, he's taken a position on Keystone XL that we're trying to work with him on. We're trying to see if we can get this dealt with. And we were encouraged that the Prime Minister raised this as the top issue between Canada and the United States when he first talked to President-elect Biden. That is encouraging to us in Alberta. So it's one of those areas where, you know, we do have the occasional points of friction with the federal government, but we do have to say when there's areas that we have common ground, you have to take yes for an answer. And we've been encouraged in some of these spaces here about the development and, you know, the beginning of building of some relationships here to get that done. So that's encouraging to us. We also have ongoing progress on Line 3, Line 5, different pipelines there. We could go on at length, but we do see some encouraging outlets for us to make sure that we can continue to lift curtailment. We actually had to stop production levels from growing in Alberta due to the differentials that were being created. We've lifted that now, so no longer is there curtailment in Alberta, so companies can continue to produce. And also we're taking a look at where these pipelines are going. So we do have a path for growth when it comes to our oil and gas industry. We still have to be vigilant. We still have to get this done. But there is truly a path for growth for our oil and gas industry on that side. What I'd like to do now as well is jump into our LNG natural gas strategy that the Associate Minister of Natural Gas and Electricity announced as part of our recovery plan. And this is actually truly exciting. So we launched a petrochemical initiative to make sure that Alberta can capitalize on the plastics market. There's still a huge demand for plastics across the world. So we want to make sure that we position Alberta to capture its part of the market share. So we think that this is $1 billion of opportunity, like tens of $1 billion opportunity for us in Alberta. We have the natural gas and the right products in order to become a player in the petrochemical industry. We're responsible with it. We have the technology to do this in a clean way. So there's a big strategy and push there on the petrochemical side and plastic side. We also launched a recycling initiative as well. It's no longer those times where we can simply ship our plastics overseas and just kind of think, hey, we did the environmentally responsible thing. That doesn't work anymore. We have to be a full cycle responsible player when it comes to plastics and recycling. And we want to position Alberta to play that leadership role in Canada and North America on recycling. That's a really important role for us. It's part of our ESG message as well, being responsible, making sure that we have that full life cycle of products dealt with in the province of Alberta. Another piece that gets me quite excited about this is when it comes to the LNG opportunity. So we're fleshing out, you're going to see some more details here in the next while from us on LNG. We do think that there's a huge opportunity for Alberta to continue to play a leadership role in lowering world emissions. We do think that it makes sense for us to displace coal and other kind of higher emitting fossil fuels in other countries. And we should play that leadership role and get that LNG to market for our province. The next one that I want to dive into is hydrogen, and this is one thing that might be kind of a news to folks around the country, but Alberta is really good at this, and just as understatement of the year. But we unlocked SAGD when no one thought it was possible. We unlocked the oil sands when no one thought it was possible. We unlocked carbon capture when no one thought it was possible in an economic way. So we have the intellectual horsepower to unlock hydrogen. We also have the best infrastructure in the country to unlock hydrogen. There was a study that came out that Edmonton area was probably the best positioned city in all of the country to do hydrogen first, get the testing done, get the work done. So we really want to make sure we position Alberta for success on the hydrogen file. I mean, you can get into the discussions about blue, green, purple. There's a whole bunch of colors when it comes to the hydrogen file, but we want to make sure that research and development is done here. We have the intellectual capital. We have the ability to get this done. And we're positioning Alberta for success there. There's some additional policy work. We kind of put out an outline of the hydrogen strategy earlier this year. That work is ongoing right now, and further details are going to be rolled out early next year on the hydrogen opportunities and how we want to position Alberta for success in that space. And I've traveled lots of places. I've been in Vancouver. I've been in other places that are developing hydrogen technologies, and they think in order to scale, they actually probably have to come to Alberta. They have to come here and be a part of it because they do recognize that we have the right cost structure, the right intellectual capital, the right workforce in order to be able to unlock hydrogen and the infrastructure as well. So that's just really important for us. A couple of the things that I'll note before I wrap up here, I'm almost at that half-hour mark, so I'll make sure I wrap up here in order to do Q&A. But a couple other pieces as well. We've also just recently got in our legislature right now, we actually have geothermal legislation. We're positioning our province to be a leader when it comes to this clean energy source. Alberta is very well positioned with the wells that we have actually drilled in our province to reposition them as part of the clean electricity mix for our province. We also, just because of our landscape with where the Rocky Mountains sit, it creates the right pressure in the heat matrix in order to do the significant research development in geothermal. So we're making sure we position Alberta for success on that front as well. One last thing that it gets me quite interested as well when it comes to our mines and minerals strategy. So here's just a bit of a lens as to where Alberta has been. The oil and gas industry has done so well that we didn't even scan the province of Alberta for other mines and minerals. We didn't bother. We just didn't take the time. But right now we're doing a scan of our province for other mines and minerals because there's so many critical mines and minerals when it comes to future development, from batteries to our cell phones, everything that goes into it. There's a whole bunch of critical minerals that we have in Alberta that we want to make sure are commercial, that we can get to commercial applications. So from nickel, cobalt, lithium, we have that ability here in Alberta. And the lithium one's really cool. We actually have some people that are extracting lithium right out of active oil and gas wells as well and turning it into a commercial product. So the technology and development here from an extraction standpoint is really interesting, and the research and development going into that is fascinating right now. You also have a big play on bitumen beyond combustion. So, in our oil sands, we have all this immense amount of bitumen, and there's a whole bunch of products that we can develop out of it. And right now we've been focused for the last decades and decades on a barrel of oil, but there's also a whole bunch of work being done into carbon fiber and a whole bunch of new minerals that are critical to the economy of the future. And we want to make sure we position Alberta for success. And the other thing that I'll just note is that Alberta has a unique power market. It's market driven. It's not government run when it comes to a crown corporation. So as a result, we've actually had a massive influx of investment into renewable energy, batteries. We actually have Tesla battery packs. You hear about these things in California, you hear about them out in south of the border. But in Canada, Alberta is actually at the forefront when it comes to putting batteries on its power grid. We've had an immense amount of investment go into that in the last 6 months. The technology is catching up, and Alberta is a leader when it comes to renewables, when it comes to solar, when it comes to wind. Alberta is a leader in that. They're also a leader in the batteries and bringing them onto our power grid. Our regulator, when it comes to that power grid, is going through a review right now on how we can maximize batteries and other utilizations of power, excess power. There's opportunities potentially for hydrogen. There's opportunities in the battery side. So we want to make sure we position Alberta for success in the long term. So I'll just kind of close with, we have an amazingly strong foundation in our province. The next 12 to 18 months, you're going to see some challenges with our oil and gas industry. It's going to continue to consolidate. You're going to continue to see some pressure there. But Alberta is very well positioned for the long term. And this recovery plan that we're developing out is going to make sure that we capitalize on our traditional strength of our economy, but also make sure we position Alberta for success in the long term. So with that, I'll close. I'm really looking forward to your questions and answers. Or I'll do my answers on my side, but questions on your side.
Thanks very much, Minister. Well, you gave us a lot to work with, so this is great. We have a few questions in. I just want to make a few comments. One of the things that I love about Alberta is the big sky and the friendly people. And I think you encapsulated that really well in what you said. So my takeaway is it's clean, green, and lean in terms of your path forward. So we've got a few questions here, and looking at the questions, I think people asked them as you were speaking. So you did cover off some of the answers, but maybe you could just drill down a little bit deeper in some of them and give specifics. So one of the questions is, can you provide more details on how exactly Alberta plans to attract investment and job creators to create more jobs in the province? Could you drill down on that a little bit more, please, Minister Schweitzer?
Sure. So on that front there, we actually have created a brand new Crown corporation called Invest Alberta. This is going to be our business development arm for the province. And I come from the private sector. So I used to work at a major international law firm. We had offices all around the world. And it never occurred to me that I should call the government when I wanted to do a deal. It never occurred to me one time ever that I should say, you know what, I'm going to call a government trade office because I want to put together a deal. So we're taking a new lens for how we're approaching business development for the province. We actually want to ride alongside the existing infrastructure that we have. So we have accounting firms, law firms, financial institutions, private equity, venture capital that's here in Alberta that has national and international reach. How do we complement their services and make sure that they have all of the information they need to close deals? Because the more deals that they close, the more investment that they bring in means more capital is getting deployed in Alberta, more people are working in Alberta. So that's kind of part one of the strategies to make sure we set that up, and that's just been set up this fall. The other part of it is making sure we simply have the lowest taxes in the entire country, and that's the biggest part. That's why we did the job creation tax cut. That's as well why we're doing the red tape reduction initiative to make sure we have efficiency when it comes to our regulatory environment. And also we're driving down the cost of government as well to make sure that we can sustain that while keeping low taxes and delivering service for our Albertans. So a multi-pronged approach. We have lots of more specific investment strategies. I mentioned the petrochemical incentive initiative that we've done. We have other areas as well where we can get into more detail, but it's really positioning Alberta as the best environment, period, when it comes to investment and growth.
Okay, thank you. This next question, again, you've covered it off. What is Alberta doing to ensure that there is a competitive environment for investment in new technology and innovation? And maybe you could flesh that out with a few existing successful examples of that. Can you address that?
Sure. On the innovation front, we just brought in, and it's going to come effective January 1, is the Innovation Employment Grant. So this will cover up to 20% of research and development for a company that's in that kind of scaling, high R&D, early stage development. So we brought that in place. And then there's meant to be a bridge between that and then when you kind of qualify for the paying corporate taxes. That's kind of the idea, is to make sure you help those companies that are getting off the ground. And then on the other side of it, you have the low corporate tax structure where you want to attract them into your province as well. As far as successful companies that are here, we've got we've already had a few unicorns. We've got ShareWorks, which was bought out by a big financial institution in the U.S. We've got companies like Alberta'S. We got Benevity. I'm a dad of young kids. We've got this one company called Cadoodle, which is it's actually really starting to take off. It's kind of like a combination of YouTube and Netflix, but for kids programming. It's based in Calgary. They're starting to do their own productions as well. For parents that are out there, Paw Patrol is one of their shows that they have on there. So that gives you some context for what they're trying to do. And they've really seen an immense amount of interest in their platform, and immense amount of people are actually trying to buy them out already. But I think they're going to continue to scale and grow, and we want them to be successful.
Wonderful. Third question, we can come back to this too, by the way. I think the Cadoodle sounds fantastic. There are some silver linings in this pandemic. Moving forward, I think behavior's changed and there are some opportunities there. Next question is, does Alberta have a plan to help the tourism industry get back on its feet following the pandemic?
So that's another one of the areas that I'm responsible for. I mean, the tourism industry has been, is one of the highest impacted areas during this pandemic. I mean, I think maybe the only other one that would be in that category would be the aviation space. We've done as much on the domestic tourism side during the summer, encouraging people to travel locally, everything else. We were initially hoping that we could launch a big aggressive advertising campaign for a domestic ski season. But just given the current numbers on COVID across the country, we've pulled back on that. And people are still having ski season. People are still skiing outdoors because you can space and you can be out there. But yeah, the tourism space has been really hit hard. We're actually in discussions right now through the cabinet process about kind of a support phase 2 for the tourism sector, trying to bridge them through this winter season. Hopefully, as we get to the into early 2021, hopefully the vaccines go as hopefully to plan. At that point in time, hopefully we have a more normal summer tourism season. We did do a tourism levy abatement where we let the service providers keep the levy. We are looking at some further supports for the destination management organizations, as well as some other supports in the tourism space. So some more news to come here in the coming weeks from us as well.
Have you got anything for us today?
No, not today, not today. They will be coming out here shortly though.
Okay, next question. Do you still see oil and gas as playing an important role in Alberta's economic future? Of course, you did outline that. You kept that till the end. But maybe again, in terms of dealing with the new administration, we know there are going to be some potential hurdles there. But I loved what you said about finding common ground. So and finding ways to work together on certain things. So what would you say about that in terms of the innovation and the transition from one energy source to another, maybe in terms of timelines, in terms of on the ground operational things that you're doing that people can kind of get their heads around on that front?
Well, I think the biggest thing that I would highlight is the immense amount of innovation that goes into oil and gas. People kind of think of it as just like a conventional, you put a pipe in the ground and all of a sudden all this product comes out. But the research and development and the scientific expertise that goes into the oil and gas industry and the skill sets that are built in that are going to be required, no matter what your kind of trajectory you think we can get off of fossil fuels in a short period of time or a long period of time. The skill sets that Albertans have to offer are going to be critical to the future economy and when it comes to energy, period. Whether that's hydrogen, there are other applications as well. The skill set is critical. If you take a look at the overall long-term supply demand for oil and gas, there's still a growth trajectory. It does have a big role to play. I would much rather have it developed here in the province of Alberta than in a country like Venezuela or other African or Middle Eastern countries that don't have the standards that we have, both on the democratic and social governance side. The other thing to highlight is the number of Indigenous communities that support the development of resources. This truly is a path for them to partner with the government and industry to find ways to lift people out of poverty. That's one of the reasons why we put in place the Indigenous Opportunities Corporation to allow them to have the ability to do equity investments for their people. So you're seeing this as obviously there's a debate around ESG around the world, and we're going to make sure we redouble our efforts to position Alberta for success. We were the first jurisdiction to put a price per ton on major emitters. We continue to have success on the TIER program. We've recently found middle ground with the federal government on methane and a whole bunch of other areas. So we're going to make sure we continue to sell our story for what the Alberta is. We're not ashamed of our oil and gas industry. I just want to make sure that it's constructive dialogue, or at least from my end, when I try to make sure we try and find ways to get people working again, that people truly understand that this is not just some industry that's trying to burn things. It really is scientific. I mean, you got carbon capture, you've got SAGD, which is highly, highly technical. You had horizontal drilling. Like what they can do with horizontal drilling, like this is literally like R&D science projects. Like this is massive science and work goes into it. So it's highly sophisticated. Quite often you actually have an industry that didn't go out there and try and sell its narrative as much as it probably should have. And Alberta in Canada is arguably the best place in the world to have these types of technologies developed. You want them developing these technologies because it will lead to a more responsible worldwide oil and gas industry. If you take Alberta out of that market, you're not going to have those standards. You're not going to have that research done at the level where it should be worldwide. So I think that Alberta has a big role to play. There's a lot of discussions with the federal government right now around carbon capture and a whole bunch of other emissions targets and other things like that. So I do think that there's a path forward that we can be creative on that can see a win-win, hopefully. But that being said, as everybody knows, Alberta will stand up for itself. We have done that from time to time. So I just don't want to let anybody think that all of a sudden we've gone soft. That's definitely not the case. We will stand up for ourselves if required.
We hear you loud and clear on that front. But I do think, in the backdrop of the pandemic, we're hearing this term circuit breaker quite a bit. And it's an approach that we, are finding, collectively with the data, that increasingly has to be taken. But that's really not the case with oil and gas. I mean, oil and gas has to transition out. And as we innovate and transition in new sources of energy. So it's really good to hear that this is at the forefront. You had mentioned the innovation employment grants earlier when you're talking about bringing in Indigenous communities, but just in innovation itself. Can you tell us a little bit more about what those grants entail for the people who are watching and may want to, have access to something that can help them spur growth in the right direction for a win-win with the companies, the people, and Alberta?
So are you talking on the Indigenous side or on the technology side?
On the technology side.
Okay, so basically if you qualify for the federal SHRED, that's where the Innovation Employment Grant comes in. As well, take a look for the job grant program that's going to be coming out here in the near term. We're trying to make sure that we position Alberta for a place where we can help alleviate some of the costs for training opportunities for bringing on a new workforce. And we're really starting to see the beginning of that ecosystem in Calgary in particular. And we also have an immensely talented post-secondary institution at the University of Alberta in Edmonton. Calgary has this University of Calgary is kind of known for quantum computing. University of Alberta is more known for AI machine learning. So there is a talented talent pool coming up in our province. And we're starting to see the emergence of that ecosystem, particularly in the city of Calgary, coming up.
Okay, and so is this different than what you had a year ago? Like, you're fairly new to the job, but could you just kind of just let us know how different this is for people who we don't want people locked in the past. We want to get people into looking at the path forward.
Well, I think that the one thing I would just highlight is, I'd say this, I've been involved in the business community in Calgary for over a decade before getting into politics, about 15 years before I got into politics. And I'd say probably 3 to 5 years ago, there was an immense amount of frustration, like unparalleled frustration that I've ever seen. And when people heard about, kind of Western alienation and everything, it was very real. People were frustrated with, feeling as though that their way of life was being completely challenged. And I don't want to diminish that is still very much alive and well in Alberta. But I would say that particularly when it comes to the business community, that there's starting to be a bit of a shift in taking a look at what the opportunities are that are ahead. I do think people every now and again want to take a look at, okay, well, what are the opportunities? And that's what I was mentioning earlier on with the innovations that are coming on. We have new accelerators and venture capital funds getting launched in green technology. The hydrogen opportunity has people excited. As excited as people were a couple of years ago about cannabis, people are equally excited now about hydrogen. I think the cannabis thing was a bit of a nationwide phenomenon that didn't quite play out the way people thought, but the way that I observed people being excited about that, they're equally excited about hydrogen right now. I do think that as well that people are taking a look at what is the path forward for Alberta? How do we position it for long-term success? And I would say that I've seen the occasional article out there saying that Alberta's best days are behind them, and I don't disagree. I do not agree at all. When you take a look at, particularly in Western Canada, the city of Calgary, and I'm again a bit biased, but I'm going to go to my own hometown in Calgary, and there's no city in Western Canada that has infrastructure like that. There's nobody that has the brand new arena that's coming on, the brand new libraries, the pathway systems, the highway systems, the downtown office structure. We literally have more empty office space in Calgary than the city of Vancouver has for entire office space. So we have more available office space that you can effectively get for operating costs right now in some of these areas. There's a more abundance of that than everything that they've got in Vancouver. Your ability to get in and out of the downtown, the rail networks that we have. We have had an immense amount of success as a province for decades from an economic standpoint. And that has led to infrastructure that's, I would say, is unparalleled for cities of the size and livability that you have. So I think that we're very well positioned for success and that we're going to build on our foundation, be proud of our foundation, but that doesn't mean that limits you. And when I wrote an op-ed called, we need to talk about the D word in Alberta and diversification. Not that other D word, but diversification. And we have to make sure that we're taking a page out of Texas. Texas was very purposeful. We were kind of seen as the Texas of the North because of our longstanding histories in agriculture and energy. And we want to take a look at what they've done because now Texas is one of the most diversified economies in all of the United States. They're there in health and life sciences, when it comes to technology in Austin, when it comes to insurance and finance. So we're taking a look at how do we position Alberta in a very similar way to what they've done in Texas.
So you, pivoting on that, you talked about this irrigation expansion. I think it's something that, there were a lot of floods about 15 years ago. And I remember talking to a few scientists on this. And I said, what's your biggest fear with the flooding? And they said, no, it's not flooding, it's drought. Our biggest fear for a national crisis. And this is before climate change really hit the headlines in the way it has now. Can you just talk about that? Because that is one of those areas where you did find common ground. You mentioned that you worked with the Infrastructure Bank on this. So it was a federal provincial initiative. Can you just speak to that, please, a little bit, Minister?
Yeah, and I'll speak to the flood as well. My constituency was actually one of the most impacted constituencies in Calgary in the flood, where you literally had entire communities that were devastated. So we're continuing to progress and work with the federal government actually on flood mitigation efforts. There's a few of them that are going through the regulatory process right now, so we can protect the downtown of Calgary as well, which was dramatically impacted by that last flood. So flood mitigation is key. And I went to law school in Winnipeg, so I went to the University of Manitoba, and literally that floodway that they have there that Premier Duff Robin built there, that was important for their city. And we have to make sure we take steps in Calgary to protect the downtown as well. But the one thing in Alberta in particular is that we don't have the immense lakes. Like Saskatchewan and Manitoba actually have more lakes, they have more wet spaces, and Alberta, particularly in southern Alberta, is very dry. It's kind of known as the Badlands. So it's been historically more kind of a ranch, cattle, very dry, warm. It actually is warmer than they think. It's actually in the low to mid 30s in the summertime in that space, but it gets very dry. So by leveraging our waterways and irrigation districts, we can get more value out of the land from a crop perspective, but it also does have other benefits, as you're mentioning, from water stewardship. One of the long-term growth challenges that a province like Alberta will have is water, and making sure that we manage it efficiently and well is critical for us going forward. Okay.
You had mentioned 2 immigration streams earlier. You were talking about entrepreneurs and graduates. Can you just explain that a little bit? Because that, to me, that has been the history of Alberta, is bringing people in and making sure they have a crack. It is a place of opportunity. So how does that play out in today's landscape?
And you know, I completely agree. Like my grandparents came over after World War I, and they homesteaded. They were Germans. They homesteaded up in northern Alberta in a community that had a bunch of people that spoke German, and you know, and they my dad and a whole bunch of other things. But it really was a place that they came to because they had an opportunity, and that really is, I think, it's a Canadian story more than anything else. But it truly is part of Alberta's fabric. And we want to make sure with the 2 new streams that we have on the entrepreneurial side, as well as on the graduate side, that we set up people that are coming into Alberta for success. So the graduate stream is designed for people that have come to our post-secondary institutions and want to stay. They understand, the one thing we're finding is that they understand the community, they understand the culture of the community. It's an easier transition for them if they want to stay for the long term. Obviously, they've been educated at a post-secondary institution in our province, so we want them to be successful, and they're there to be a part of the workforce, and they can have a high-paying, high-quality job for themselves and future generations. So that's the one stream. It helps fill a gap as well in the marketplace right now, quite often on the technology side, where we're seeing a lot of those graduates are coming out of. On the entrepreneurial stream as well, again, this is designed to help in many of our smaller communities as well. You're having the transition of small businesses, and they need to have buyers, and they need to have people that want to be in those small businesses. And we do have a lot of entrepreneurial immigrants that want to buy those companies, buy those small businesses and operate them. So that's one part of it. And then the other part of it from the entrepreneurial side, as well as filling the gap. We have, this goes to technology companies. It's not an Alberta only issue, but it goes everywhere, is that we're lacking kind of that experience, kind of a senior technology experience to train the young people coming in. Technology has more and more applications. There's an ever expanding competition for kind of that mid-management, kind of senior management level. So we want to make sure with the immigration stream that we have coming in, we have that right talent pool coming to help train the young people that are coming into the system.
So this would obviously help with retention, because I guess we've seen an inflow of people, out migration from other provinces, and you want to keep them people in their new homes and transfer those skills.
Well, and also too, you're seeing COVID actually, I think, is going to be really interesting when you come outside the other side of this pandemic. I think the behavior patterns have completely changed. You used to hear the argument that, for example, like a Toronto argument, is that you had to be on Bay Street if you wanted to be in finance. You had to be in Bay Street. Well, Bay Street hasn't been home for 9 months, and the finance industry seems to be working. So there's opportunities as well to kind of disrupt some of those arguments that you have to be in a certain geographic location. And we're actually already having conversations with a whole bunch of global players about where do they want to put their next 250 to 500 employees, because their employees want to have flexibility, and they know that they don't have to necessarily locate them in downtown New York, Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal. They can go anywhere. And we do have an immense value proposition in Alberta from a cost of living, taxation perspective. So we're trying to position ourselves for success there too.
Okay, so that kind of takes care of the provincial competitive position that you have, because you are competing for people with other provinces within Canada. But in the end, we're all Canadians.
It's international competition. It's not only national, but it's international. And honestly, it's empowering the workforce. The workforce gets to choose now where they want to be, and they're not as determined as much by where the head office is anymore. So we're in a really disruptive age.
Yeah. Okay. So that leads me to just a final point. As a woman in this conversation, I would be remiss in not, basically broaching that topic for you. Just a funny sidebar story. One of my roommates way back in the day, her mom was one of the first women to graduate with an MBA from Harvard. And when she did, she couldn't get a job anywhere outside of being a secretary. So one of her classmates was up in Alberta, in Calgary in particular, and phoned her up and said, you know what, you're way too smart for that. Come on up here. Nobody cares if you have the nose on your side of your face or you're green. If you can do the job, you're going to have it. And she became a senior executive in the oil industry. That was in the 50s, the early 50s. So there's something about Alberta that is very welcoming and does give people a shot. As you said, nobody cares where you came from, who your parents are. It's what you can do and how hard you're willing to work. So what I'm hearing today, Minister Schweitzer, is that Alberta is a place, if you're willing to roll up your sleeves, we don't care where you're from, we don't care what you do, we care that you can be a part of our economy and the fabric of our society and culture and contribute to Alberta and Canada as a whole. Am I hearing you correctly on that?
Yeah, I think you summarized it pretty well there. You can always, it sounds like you want to be an Albertan almost, which is good. You can come on down anytime. But
I have fond memories from Alberta, but
yeah. So, but we also, we really do have some really neat ventures that are going on. We have one called the 51, which is because 51% of the population there is women. They've launched a new venture fund to support women entrepreneurs in Alberta. I met with them recently. I've got 2 daughters. I want them to have every opportunity in the world. Alberta does have a reputation as well when it comes to senior executives and women kind of filling those roles. So we want to make sure it truly is an equal opportunity space and people can get ahead on their merits, and that's what Alberta's all about.
And on top of that, world class.
Yeah, completely.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Minister Schweitzer. We really appreciate your time, your expertise, and your insights. It's so nice to have a candid conversation. And I love that people were able to throw questions at you and that you were willing to come on here and take them. So I wish you the best of luck. We're with you. I think one of the things when the Premier Kenny was at the Canadian Club last year, the one thing I noted from what he said, and our Deputy Prime Minister was there as well, both Albertans. So the thing that we have to really do is to shrink the geography in our country. And for me, that's one of the biggest silver linings in this pandemic, is that you and I and our audience can be anywhere in Canada or around the world right now, and we're attending this event. Whereas before it was an in-person limitation. So we've already shrunk the geography a little bit, and I know we're going to have great things coming ahead. And thank you for also sharing the innovation at the University of Calgary with the DNA vaccine developments and your Nobel Prize laureate. These are all things that Canada has bragging rights for, regardless of where you're from. Before we go, as we mentioned at the beginning of the show, we have a draw for a free subscription to the Ottawa Business Journal. So I have to ask you if you could please pick a number between 1 and 300.
299.
299. Okay, that says something about your personality. You're right on the edge. I love it. True gambler. So we'll be sending an email to the 299th subscriber or registrant for today's event. The Impact Public Affairs will be reaching out to you for a free subscription. So congratulations to 299. At our next event, we will hold a draw for a free subscription to the Hill Times. So come back for free access to the Hill Times. I want to thank everyone who joined us virtually. Our sponsors, Shaw Communications, RBC Bank, Welch LLP, Strategy Corp, and TD Bank for making this discussion possible. Without your support, we wouldn't have been able to do this. So I hope everybody has some very practical, actionable takeaways. You've had some insights into some grants and funding. You have a reason to look at Alberta. And I would also ask you to please join us for our next event, because as the minister mentioned, small businesses and medium-sized businesses, we're going to be focusing on that on December the 9th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. The topic is how Canadian small businesses are working throughout the current crisis and how they can thrive in a post-pandemic economy. We heard a little bit about that today. The panel includes Perrin Beatty, President and CEO of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, Paul Thompson, Associate Deputy Minister of Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada, Dr. Wendy Sukier, Professor of Entrepreneurship and Strategy at the Ted Rogers School of Management and Director of Diversity Institute at Ryerson University, one of my old alma maters, John Stackhouse, Senior Vice President of RBC, and the moderator is one of my fabulous colleagues, the Heather Schofield, I call her, economics columnist at Ottawa Bureau Chief, Parliamentary Bureau Chief, I should say, for the Toronto Star. So please join us. If you would like more information, visit www.canadianclubottawa.ca for more details. That's a wrap for today. So thanks very much for joining us and have a great week. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you so much.